Okay, let's see if I can figure this all out. Okay, my name is Richard Horowitz. When I was in New York, I represented the association at the United Nations. When I came back, Regina Tapuchi took over. For the last 5 hours, I've been a member of the Board of Governors, and among my most significant accomplishments for the association is I am the one that moved this little staircase from this side to this side to make it easier. Thank you very much. This topic, I think, is the most, at least from the title, I think is the most difficult topic to understand because it talks about human rights, asymmetric warfare, and lawfare. And so therefore I prepared a very short introduction, and then I will introduce the first speaker. Non-state actors rely on a legal claim of self-determination or claim the same legal right to self-defense as do states. States, however, are legally entitled to buy arms and can raise armies of hundreds of thousands. Thus, the term asymmetric warfare developed to describe armed conflict between states and non-state actors. And as we know, non-state actors like Hamas and Hezbollah intentionally fire their munitions from populated areas, generating challenges to Israel's human rights practice. International law has yet to properly deal with these issues. For example, the ICJ decision from 2004 regarding the security barrier that Professor Zilberschatz referred to this morning states that, and I quote from paragraph 139, Article 51 of the Charter thus recognizes the existence of an inherent right of self-defense in the case of armed attack by one state against another. However, Israel does not claim that the attacks against it are computable to a foreign state. Consequently, the court concludes that Article 51 of the Charter has no relevance in this case, end quote. Lawfare has been defined as the use of the law as a weapon of war. It uses law to silence free speech, to impede the ability of democracies to fight terrorism. Asymmetric warfare, therefore, is the ideal arena for lawfare to challenge acts of state, and we, of course, are the prime target for these challenges. To discuss this issue, we have three distinguished speakers. First, Dr. Gil Limon is the Senior Advisor to the Israeli Cabinet Secretary. Prior to that, Dr. Limon served as a Deputy Military Advocate for the IDF Central Command and as the Head Legal and Security Affairs Section of the IDF's International Law Department. During his IDF career, Dr. Limon served as Head of Security and Criminal Affairs Section and Legal Advisor for Security Affairs in the Office of the Legal Advisor of the West Bank. Dr. Limon also served as Legal Advisor to Israel's mission to the UN. He holds an LLB, LLM, and PhD from the Faculty of Law of the Hebrew University, where he was a research assistant for Professors Yuval Shani and Ruth Lapidot. He is also a member of the editorial board of the Hebrew University Law Review and visiting fellow at the Faculty of Law at Cambridge University. Dr. Limon.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the introduction. Sometimes I think that I really have to bring my mother to these kind of events. I will speak louder, okay. So good afternoon to everyone. I skipped the joke because it was probably wasn't funny. First, I would like to apologize on behalf of Avichai Mandelblit, the Secretary of the Cabinet, who was supposed to be here today. On Tuesday morning after the events in Jerusalem, we started a series of high-level discussions, of course, with the Prime Minister, and Avi understood that he will not be able to come, so he asked me to come here, and I'm glad for this opportunity. I know ILJJ for a long time. As you heard, I was in the International Law Department of the IDF right after Kasled, and I dealt a lot with Goldstone, and all this and the other issues on the same period of time, the flotilla incident and others, and I personally saw the importance of the work of IJLJ and how influential it was, and I'm really honored to be here today. So I'm going to speak about lawfare, and I will try to explain from the practitioner point of view, and also with academic background, how I see the whole process of lawfare, how it works, what are the legal sources, and then to give some maybe ideas how states should deal with lawfare. And I can tell you that these days, during Operation Protective Edge, the Prime Minister established a team headed by the Secretary of the Cabinet that coordinates the entire ministries that deal with the issue of lawfare post-operation. And many of the ideas and the recommendations that I'm going to present here are already implemented. So let's start. I think that this picture, besides being funny, I guess, it also demonstrates the complexity of the term asymmetry war, because I think traditionally we would think that the asymmetry refers to the power, the balance of powers. We have the state, which is very strong militarily, and on the other hand, we have the non-state actor, which is weak, and this is the asymmetry. But in the last years, I think that we see that we have also what we call opposite asymmetry. And I would like to give two examples to this opposite asymmetry. First, there is the issue of the commitment to international law. Whereas the state is committed to international law, at least democratic states like Israel, and trying to do its utmost to keep the rules of international law, rules of distinction and proportionality and precautions, even in very hard conditions. The other party ignores on purpose international law, which provides him with an advantage on the battlefield, because they hide behind civilians, they use ambulances and other protected facilities. So here is the first opposite asymmetry. There is advantage to the non-state actor because of ignoring international law. And second illustration is the issue of legitimacy, whereas the state is much more affected by international criticism. The effect that we spoke, the last panel, the speakers discussed the issue of BDS. This is something that we see it only towards states. And so the state is under much more international, it's the only party in this conflict which is under international pressure, whereas the terrorist organization, they don't really care if they have international criticism or even if they have international criminal cases, because most of these leaders, the ISIS leaders, Hamas leaders, Hezbollah leaders, they don't travel to Europe, whereas our leaders are really might be affected. It also affects the economy, international relations, and so on. So here comes the opposite asymmetry. What unique in terrorism is the fact that terrorism looks to the place where the state is most vulnerable. Okay, so this is why they attack civilians, because first, the state cannot protect every civilian, and we see it in Jerusalem in the last days. And second, they know that when you attack civilians, this is force multiplier, because you have the public pressure on the government, maybe to change the policy towards the policy that the terrorist organizations want to achieve. That was the way that Al-Qaeda thought 15 years ago, that they can affect America by doing the horrible terrorist attacks in 9/11. So that was the weakness that they found, and they attacked in the past. Now, I think that there is a new vulnerability which is identified, and this is the issue of legitimacy. So they can see that they can really affect states by portraying these states as pariah states, as states that violate international laws, as states that the leaders are war criminals, because of also the development, which is of course important, development of international criminal courts. So they go and try to affect also through this channel by delegitimizing or creating delegitimization of the state. So when states are involved in asymmetric warfare, what they see in front of them is not only the military front, the traditional military front, they see in front of them several other fronts. I think that one missing here is also the economic front, and this is the BDS issue that was discussed beforehand. So they see the media front, they see the diplomatic front, and of course, in the legal front. Now, the legal front is very essential because legality, and I heard the comment of the last comment of Yossi Shine in the last discussion, but still legality is a very important component today in the Western world when it comes to legitimacy. So when a state cannot justify its activity on legal grounds, it would be very hard for that state to also to argue for the legitimacy of its activity. This is why the legal front becomes so essential when it comes to the struggle over legitimacy. And lawfare, and that's exactly lawfare. That's the place where legal tools are used in order to affect the legitimacy of the state and in order to achieve another result, which is to achieve the results of the war, either political or military goals. Now, there are a lot of discussions about how to define lawfare. I don't like these discussions. I don't see practical importance. But still, I brought these three definitions proposed by a former American judge in order to make 2 points. First, you can see from these definitions that the term has been developing during the years. At the beginning, the term lawfare was very limited. It was focused on realizing a military objective using law, and this is specifically, I will elaborate more later, but it's about the tactical lawfare that terrorist organizations, they shoot behind civilians or they use ambulances to reach the tactical advantage, the military tactical advantage during the battle. Later it was extended to operational objective and then to warfighting objectives. And here in the last definition, it includes also the political objectives of the war. So what I'm trying to say here is that warfare and lawfare, so is a very, very wide term. It's not limited also only to the tactical level. That's first point. Second point, and I think it's even more important, is the fact that lawfare, like warfare, it's a neutral term. It's not negative, it's not positive. Lawfare can be used by states, legitimately used in order to promote their own purposes in the fighting. It can also be abused. It's like a gun. A gun can be used for self-defense, it can be legal, it can be used for murder. And the meaning is for states that states should not be shy to use lawfare also to promote their own purposes in the battle. And I will demonstrate. From dealing with these issues for the last, I think, 10 years, even more, I can say that states don't use lawfare positively enough, and there is much more that can and should be done. Mostly states are dealing with lawfare defensively, trying to deal with legal attacks that they are facing. So this is the issue of definition. So now, how it works? It's of course it's a scheme, but I think that we can divide. By the way, if someone wants this presentation, I can send it, so you don't have to follow the screen. There are three levels of negative lawfare that we can generally speak about. The first is the tactical level, and I spoke about it. This is the win-win situation for the terrorist organization, okay? Because they either the states will be deterred from making the attack because they don't want to harm civilians, they don't want to harm UN facilities or ambulances, and in that case, of course, the terrorist organization, they win because they're immune from attack, or the states conduct the attacks, and then there are many casualties, and then again, they win in the front of legitimacy. And this is the tactical level. There are many examples. I think that in the last operation, there were many photographers on the ground with the soldiers, and we saw many videos and photographs showing Hamas using mosques and civilian areas in order to conduct military activities against the idea. So this is the first level. And by the way, it's important to say that this is probably the only level where the state is facing the other party, the terrorist organization, when we speak about lawfare. Because in the other levels that I'm going to discuss, the state is confronting with other players that are totally unconnected to the concrete battle, to the concrete operation. What makes it more sophisticated and more challenging for the state to confront with. So the second level is the strategic level. This is what we call delegitimization. This is a word that I'm always happy when I succeed in saying it in one try. And the last slide will deal with the strategic level more. But here we can see an example. Let's say the new Shabbos committee, I'm sure that you're all familiar with. So the armed conflict was between Israel and Hamas. And if you recall, Abu Mazen, the head of the PA, even denounced Hamas during the operation. He said, what are you doing? You're launching rockets on Israel, and the outcome, you're responsible for the killing of innocent civilians. So during the operation, Abu Mazen denounced Hamas, but right after the operation, he took the advantage, the reality that Israel used military force and that civilians were unfortunately killed, to go to the Human Rights Council, together with the automatic majority that the Arab states have there, and to establishing this committee. So we see now this level is much more sophisticated, because on the other side, you don't see the terrorist organization. You see legitimate body, like Human Rights Council. Okay, legitimate, we can discuss it, but they have their own legitimacy. They are a UN organization. They have, they were elected in a democratic manner. And I think that they also do good things. Besides the issues that are less good, the issues that are connected to Israel, but now it becomes more challenging for the state, because you have to explain that specific body that is in nature can serve good purposes, now is being eye-checked and being used for purposes which are illegitimate. So this is the second level, and the next slide I will show more. And the last level, which is I think the most challenging and sophisticated, this is the struggle over the applicable law. And here again, the state is facing the many actors, also organizations, NGOs, and others and here the struggle is whether international law will allow states to effectively fight terrorism. And of course, there are legitimate discussions, academic discussions, and different opinions, but I think that you can still isolate, and you can see cases where law is on purpose distorted in order to bring to the outcome that states cannot effectively fight terrorism. And I think that the best illustration for now is the Goldstone report. I hope that the Shabbos report won't be the second best or even a better example, but I don't have much expectation. And if you go to every such title and you read the Goldstone report, I think that you see how the report, one of the aims is to create norms, legal norms, that will not allow states to fight terrorism. And I give some examples when we speak about the misinterpretation of the laws of armed conflict. There is, for example, the issue of demolition of houses, not houses, demolition of private property. Okay, there were some cases that were discussed by the Goldstone report. It was a flour mill, and there were others. And you see that the standard used by Goldstone in the report that the army can demolish houses only if there is a concrete threat. Destroy. Thank you. Destroy houses. Yeah, it's demolish sounds. It's from other problem. Yeah. So the army can destroy houses only if there is a concrete threat from the property to the army, which is very similar to human rights standards. But when you go to international law, you see that the standards are much wider. It speaks about military necessity. The issue of early warnings, the standards that are being presented and implemented in the report are very, very strict. That should be like the concrete and understood by the person that receives them. And there is a list of demands that you cannot find any basis for them in international law. And the outcome is that Israel, that I personally think that used the most wide-ranging and sophisticated apparatus for early warnings in the Gaza, including the personal phone calls and knock on the roof and everything. In this report, Israel violated the obligation for early warning. So here, the battle here is not only about Israel. It's also about other states that are involved in such operations, armed conflict. And I think that the outcome is bad for international law, because if such standards are accepted, the outcome is that states will ignore international law. Because if international law, this is something that states cannot obey, so there is no motivation for them to fulfill in such circumstances. Another example, this is the issue of international human rights law, and the question, what is the relationship between the laws of armed conflict and international human rights law? And this is a very complicated question. And Yuval Shani here, the expert, I think, and also supervisor of my PhD. But I think that even Yuval will agree that here in the report what happened was there is a certain case, the case of a Daya family. Okay, there were two houses. In one house there were hidden rockets, and the other house it was an innocent house, and this family lived there. And there was a mistake, an innocent mistake, and the house with the civilians was destroyed from the air. And so Goldstone said, okay, I found there is no violation of international humanitarian law, the laws of armed conflict, but now I go to international human rights law. And there is a violation because the standards are much higher. The standards are something that's impossible for states that are involved in armed conflict to comply with. You say, okay, so Israel violated the other set of rules. This is something which is impossible for states. And these are some examples for this third level. Now, I'm going back to the second level, to the strategic level of warfare. And I want to show from the point of view of the process how it works. So first we have the political bodies. Now in the political bodies we have here the General Assembly, Security Council, Human Rights Council, the Secretary General. So in a General Assembly and Human Rights Council are basically controlled by what they call the non-allied movement, but they support the Palestinians, and you know that we are approaching Kaftet November, 29th of November, the day when the United Nations decided to establish two states, Jewish state and Palestinian state, and one would think that the United Nations will celebrate this day, okay, as a day maybe to promote peace or something like that, but this day the United Nations is dedicated, and we have here also Anvayevsky, is dedicated to memorize the suffer of the Palestinian people. And on the same day, every year, the United Nations adopts 27, 28 anti-Israeli decisions that are adopted by this majority. So the GA can basically bring any resolution that condemns Israel, but it's not enough, because it doesn't reach the last level, which is what they want to reach, the legal level, because legitimacy today has very strong component of legality. And these condemnations alone they do not affect states, at least enough as they want. So the purpose is to reach the legal bodies, especially the ICC. So what is the technique? The technique is to go to the second level, the mixed one, the legal and political, and to establish the Goldstone Committee, Shabas Committee, and other committees which have more legitimacy. Okay, they're not political. They have these professors. How much? 5. Okay, thank you. International professors, very distinguished, and that should be the basis to take it to the next level, to the legal level. So this is how they want it to work. This is how it should work from their perspective, from those who lead the strategic level. And the purpose is, of course, the ICC, and there are different efforts. I can say that the main defense for states between the second level and the third level is, of course, the issue of complementarity investigations. And this is why I think in the last years this issue becomes so important, because if the state doesn't have a process of investigation that complies with the demands of international law, so the state will not have the defense between the second and the third level. 1 minute on the Goston report. Goston report, as I said, the perfect demonstration of what I spoke about so far. So what they did, what he did, he found a few interviews of former IDF officers and one minister saying, these populist statements that, Gaza should be demolished, etc., and say, okay, this is the policy of the State of Israel. We have policy. Then he took 36 incidents, implementing very, very high standards, and saying all the incidents are war crimes. Okay, so we have the second leg, and the third leg. This is he took the issue of complementarity, because he knew that this is the defense for Israel, and say the legal system of Israel, the purpose is to immune the commanders, to immune the responsibles for war crimes. So the recommendation was very firm, and go to the ICC, go to universal jurisdiction. So that was the example. I mean, I assume that we are going to have a pretty much similar outcome. And this is the last slide, okay? How should states deal with lawfare? I don't have time, but maybe in the Q&A, just to say that there is a distinction between counter-lawfare to respond to these efforts that I spoke about, and between positive lawfare. I think that states should, and this is what we're trying to do right now, to be more proactive on the issue of lawfare, and also to have initiatives to put the other side also on the defense. And that's it for now. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Professor Amichai Cohen. He is the Dean and Professor of International Law at the Faculty of Law, Ono Academic College. His research interests include international humanitarian law, international national security law, and the interplay between international law and domestic law. Professor Cohen is a research fellow at the Israel Democracy Institute. He has made several appearances before the Knesset Committee and Ministry of Justice officials regarding the application of international law and Israeli law. Dr. Cohen has organized and participated in a wide range of international academic conferences and published extensively in prominent academic journals. A former visiting professor at American University in Washington College of Law, Dr. Cohen holds an LLB from the Hebrew University and LLM and JSD degrees from Yale Law School. Professor Cohen.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me here, speaking at this distinguished conference. I think it was in 2008 European Cup tournament, where one of the early games took place in one Tuesday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and Greece, which was a very important team, lost to some obscure team, and the manager was asked, how did it happen? So his answer was, 4 o'clock in the afternoon is not a time to play football. Well, I'm not sure if 4 o'clock in the afternoon is a time to speak about international humanitarian law. As Henry VIII told his wives, I'll try not to keep you long, especially since the next speaker, I'm sure you're all eager to hear. So I'll try to keep it brief, at least to remain faithful to the time allotted to me. So several speakers here, which I've been fortunate to listen to, have spoken about the fact that we are in Israel is involved, and not only Israel, several liberal democracies are involved in armed conflict, which are called asymmetric conflicts, which means also in an organizational sense, there is a state with all its might and power against a non-state actor, militia, armed band, terrorist organization, or what have you. And also, as the former speaker has noted, asymmetric in the legal sense, where one party tries to remain faithful to the principles of international law, of the laws of armed conflict or international humanitarian law, and the other side many times does not respect them at all. And several scholars, politicians, military officers have offered that the result of this is that international humanitarian law is not relevant anymore. It should be changed. We should have something new instead of the system we currently have. This might be the fact, however, change has not occurred yet. And what I would like to speak about today is how have armies of liberal democracies responded to the challenges brought by the asymmetric conflict. What have they done in order to implement these laws in action? Once again, I think armies are skeptical of the fact that there will be a change in the laws of armed conflict. They might speak about change, but they understand that the law is here and change is very difficult. My main claim is that the ways armies responded to these challenges, armies, once again, of liberal democracies involved in asymmetric armed conflict, is through the areas of procedures. I call it the bureaucratization of the implementation of international humanitarian law. Instead of dealing with the issues, substantive issues, they developed procedures. Procedures both in terms of when do they operate and the level which decides on operation regarding military operations. I'll give examples in two areas. I think that will be my, at least if I can use a term I borrow from international humanitarian law, that would be my target, to use two examples, and I'll see if we have time for a little more than that. So let's speak first about the question of targeting. The issue of targeting is a major issue of the laws of armed conflict, of an international humanitarian law. Who is the target? Now, the customary international law and treaty law define what is a military objective, who is a participant in armed conflict. So there is a good definition of who may armies or armed forces target during a military operation. The problem, of course, is that in asymmetric conflicts, these definitions are irrelevant. They do not give a good answer to the question of who may the armed force attack. So if we have a military target, we have a definition which it is used for a military reason or for a military objective. However, if you face an organization which operates from within civilian population, then defining what exactly the military object is very difficult. Everything is used in the armed conflict. Defining who is the combatant is very difficult. You don't have a clear set of people who wear uniforms and live in military barracks where you can say these are the soldiers and they could be attacked. There's a question here. So the traditional definitions are very hard to implement. What do armed forces do? So I'll just give the Israeli example, which later developed into a general example, and it's the use of preventive lethal force, or its other name, targeted killings. Now, when Israel first admitted to using this system in 2001, I think, it was early 2001, and it's important, it's early 2001. It was quite generally seen as a very problematic way of going about targeting. It was called extrajudicial killing. Of course, what you do is that you, in the use of lethal force, preventive use of lethal force, what you do is you define a person as a combatant, and then you say, even if he's not wearing uniform, even if he's not involved currently in any specific military action, still I am, or the attacking army still targets him because we know he's generally involved in some form in the armed conflict. Now, it seems that many liberal democracies, especially the US, but also many allies of the US, accept the general proposition that sometimes, under some circumstances, the use of preventive lethal force or targeted killing is allowed. Even the ICRC accepts that in certain circumstances, the use of preventive lethal force is allowed. The discussion now is regarding the correct procedure to go about this. How much intelligence do you need in order to decide that a person is a legitimate military target? How do you gather this information? How far to his history and to his actions do you have to look into? What Israel does, and this is an example I heard from Irit Kohn, the president, that you are interested in Protective Edge, the operation. So in Operation Protective Edge, in order to attack a person, to shoot a specific person, there needs to be, this is the way the IDF acts, there needs to be, it's in Hebrew also, the Hebrew term is haflala. In English, the only translation I can think about is criminalization, but it's not criminalization in the sense of what we usually think about. It's you need to have some level of proof that this person is indeed involved in an armed conflict. And the main question that commanders are asking themselves is, has this threshold been achieved? The second question commanders are involved with is, who makes the decision? Because procedure is not only about gathering information, procedure is also about what is the correct level of decision making. So who may approve? Now, there are several reasons to this move. Once again, my claim is that we can see a move in the way armies implement international humanitarian law, from asking the substantive questions to asking procedural questions. How do we make the decisions? Who makes the decisions? So there are several reasons for this move. The first, of course, is that the nature of the asymmetric armed conflict drives commanders to making these decisions. So what we have in asymmetric conflicts are not vast armies with thousands of tanks going over the desert, fighting against vast armies of the other side. What we have are very professional operations. Either you use a very, very sophisticated technological tool, like a third-generation missile, or what you have are very limited incursions and on-the-ground operations, but very limited, with a small number of soldiers going to a very specific reason, to a very specific place. All these are very require professionalism on the part of the operators, and actually the military commander is not anymore, or there is a move, of course, it's not a binary, but he's less a leader which needs to take his forces behind him. He is more a bureaucrat, a person who executes a plan, a specific plan, a pre-planned operation. The execution is very important. Now, of course, armed forces, when they operate, they sometimes face surprises, right? Like in Operation Protective Edge, the tunnel. Right? This was a surprise. But once again, then you devise a very specific plan in order to face the challenge. So this calls for procedures. This calls for bureaucracy. This calls to a very set, limited of responses to problems. The second issue, of course, is that it is very, very important in asymmetric conflicts to make the correct decision. The armies of the state in asymmetric conflicts face a very problematic contradiction in their goals. On the one hand, they want to win the war, whatever winning means. We don't know what winning means anymore, but anyway, they want to win. On the other hand, they don't want to hurt the population from which the enemy operates. They need to keep the population somehow in a way which is not, which would not turn it completely against. They try to win the hearts of the civilian population. So this is a very, very delicate balancing thing that commanders are required to do. Once again, it calls for procedures. It calls for a very predefined set of ways to balance contradicting issues. And lastly, I think, the problem of control. In asymmetric conflict, and this was also mentioned by my by the previous speaker, media, international organizations are all giving attention to whatever happens. Now, if something wrong happens, this has an effect not only on the specific operation, but there is a flow back to the political level and to the high command, right? If civilians are killed, this is not only a mistake of the commander on the ground. This has problematic effects on the political level too. The political level requires control over what happens on the ground. And control is achieved by bureaucracy. The political level requires the commanders to follow specific procedures in order for mistakes not to happen. Because every mistake could be a dramatic setback for the political level. So these are basically, I think, the reasons why the move from substantive discussion to a more procedural discussion. Now, I must say that we scholars of IHL have some notion of the procedure which should be followed in some cases in IHL, but we don't have a good general theory of how decisions should be made, who should make the decisions. We don't have a good grasp of the issue. However, I think military lawyers, these lawyers which are attached to the fighting units, a lot of what they do is specifically this. They are responsible for looking after the fact that commanders will actually follow the correct procedures that were preset in these cases. So there is a dichotomy, I would say, between the discussions, the academic discussions, the writing regarding international humanitarian law, and the work on the ground that's done in international humanitarian law. And there is a need to overcome this gap. I do not have time, it seems, to convince you that actually the question of proportionality in armed conflict, which is a major question in all asymmetric conflict, is actually of the same magnitude. That is to say that we don't exactly know what is required substantively by the principle of proportionality. We know it, we have a general idea that we have to take into account civilian casualties, but we don't exactly know what is required. What we do know and what is developed by all armed forces of all liberal democracies is a procedure in which a military commander is required to ask himself how many civilians will be killed, and is there a way to limit civilian casualties? Once again, it is about the procedure. But I won't speak a lot about it. Now, just to tie it down a little and give a little theory or a little normative evaluation, so is it a good move? Now, of course, a good move depends on how do you define something a good thing. So I can only speak about the effect. So let's speak a little for 2 or 3 minutes about the effects of this move. So the first effect, of course, is that we can now think about implementation of international humanitarian law very similar to the way in which we think generally about the implementation of administrative law. Meaning, administrative law is a lot about procedures. Did the relevant person who has the authority, did he follow the correct procedures? This is a lot of administrative law. So we now think about military commanders more like we think about administrators. This also means that we can now evaluate, lawyers and judicial bodies can now evaluate the way the commanders acted according to basic principles of administrative law. So we are not trying to, once again, or the judicial bodies do not need to go into the specific considerations of the military commanders. They do not have to replace the military commanders. What they do, as they do in every other administrative case, is look whether the decision was taken according to the procedures. The second thing, I think, is placing the responsibility where it actually belongs, and it is about command responsibility. Now, there is a tendency, a negative, I think, tendency, in military operation to throw the responsibility down to the actual person who shot the specific bullet. Procedures have the tendency to push responsibility back to the person who set the procedures, to the person who was responsible to educate the soldiers to act according to procedures, to the person who was responsible to oversee that the procedures are actually followed by the commanders. And this, I think, is a good development in the sense that it places the responsibility where it belongs. So I'll finish here and which actually with a call for further development of this subject. Thank you very much.
Our final speaker is retired Admiral Ami Ayalon. He is the former head of the Israeli security agency, the Shin Bet, and the former commander of the Israeli Navy. He has served as a cabinet minister and a member of the Knesset. Along with Sari Nusseibeh, he headed the People's Voice of Peace initiative in 2002. Ayalon holds a BA in economics and political science from Bar-Ilan University and is a graduate of the U.S. Naval War College. He holds an MA in public administration from Harvard University and an MA in law from Bar-Ilan University. He is a senior research fellow at the Israel Democracy Institute and heads the Liberal Democracies Facing Asymmetric Conflicts research program, which is a joint project between the IDI, Herzl Institute, and the University of Haifa. Ami Ayalon serves as the chairman of the executive committee of the University of Haifa and as the chairman of AKIM, the National Association of Rehabilitation of Children and Adults with Intellectual Disabilities. Ayalon is one of the founders of Blue White Future, a nonpartisan political movement committed to securing the future of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state through facilitating inclusive discourse to promote a two-state solution.
Thank you very much. You promised me that it will be short, so I don't know. My parents came from Transylvania, by the way. During the British Mandate, I find it very interesting and very important and relevant to what I'm going to tell you. But first, I hate to blame people, and I'm looking somebody to blame for my being here. So Irit is busy now, so I can't do it. And Yafa Zilbashat's a good friend of mine. She's not here already, so I have nobody to blame. But I feel honored by being here because I believe that it is a very important group of people, and it is my privilege to address you. Since the topic of my presentation was to give you the view of the director of the Israeli Shin Bet, so I have to start by saying that I was not born in the Shin Bet. In a way, I was born in the Navy, and I spent my 33 years of my military career in the Navy, and only after 33 years, I became the director of the Israeli Shin Bet. And second, I became the director only because and as a result of the assassination of our Prime Minister. And I have to remind myself, he was not assassinated by a Palestinian terrorist. He was assassinated by a Jewish reserve soldier. After many years, I'm not a lawyer, but I decided to study law in Bar-Ilan University, and it was years after Yigal Amir left the university. Every time when I entered to one of the rooms, I was asking myself whether he was sitting on the same chair. I'm proud of being a student of Bar-Ilan University, but I believe that it is very relevant to the way I see terror as an Israeli today. Second, for me, I did not spend too many years in the academia. I have to remind myself, and I have to remind you, that in the end of every legal process, there is a human being. In this case, I'm standing in the end of several processes that was discussed here. I killed people. I killed many people. I killed people from a distance when I saw their eyes. I killed people by shooting missiles to 100 kilometers. So I did it in many techniques. Several years ago, after participating in a movie that created a lot of debate, gatekeepers, friends asked me, even those who opposed to what I said in this movie, they asked me, how come that all 6 of you, former directors, came from different origins, different background, sometimes different Israeli cultures, different political views. In a way, you are speaking the same language. So, frankly speaking, I didn't have a good answer, but it took me about 2-3 minutes. And then I told him, look, when I think of it, when I was in the Navy, all the people that I killed were targets. Even when I saw their faces, I knew nothing about it. I didn't know what's his name, his family, his wife, his parents, and I couldn't care less. Life was very easy. It was divided, black and white. Good guys, bad guys. We are the good guys. We have to kill the bad guys in order to defend the good guys. That's it. And the way how we do it, this is just a profession. I'm saying it because in the Shin Bet, it is totally different. You cannot interrogate a person. You know that he is a terrorist. You know that he killed your friends. You know that he will do it again and again and again, but in order to interrogate him, in order to recruit him, you have to know his name. You have to know the name of his children, his wife, his parents, and suddenly, without understanding, he is becoming a human being. Once he is becoming a human being, it is very, very difficult to be afraid of him. You understand his motives. You do not justify, but you understand where it comes from. You understand the nuances. You understand that they are not the same. Sometimes it is a result of humiliation, of poverty, lack of hope, and sometimes it is because of ideology, nationalism, whatever. But there is a very wide version. There is a huge difference between them. In my case, I cannot visit Spain. I cannot visit Netherlands. And when I have to fly to England, the British ambassador, he is a very good friend of mine, when it is published, because I have to give a speech, I don't know, I was invited to give a speech in the London School of Economics by a friend of mine, Professor Mary Kaldor. So it was published. So he called me and told me, listen, Ami, I cannot promise you that you will not be arrested. So I said, okay, I'll take the chance. I'm saying it because for many of us, it is something very real, and I hope I do not offend anybody, but I don't think that lawyers will be the people who will decide when it comes to this process. And I will elaborate on it in a few minutes. And third, an anecdote. Years ago, I was in London. We were discussing, it was in the middle of the Intifada. We met some Israelis, Palestinians, and we tried to see whether we can do something together. I was not in any official position at the time, so discussion was very easy, very fluent. And suddenly, I was preparing myself coffee, and a friend of mine, a Palestinian psychiatrist, Iyad Sarraj, he came to me. I knew him because he was arrested by Arafat, was fighting for civil liberties among Palestinians. And when I came to the Israeli Shin Bet, I decided that I have to meet not only people in our jail or people whom we are paying them in order to get information, but people who are writing in newspapers, books. So I met him, and we became friends. Years later, I meet him in London, and people are dying on both sides of the no border. And he tells me, Ami, finally, we won, we Palestinians. I said, come on, are you crazy? You are losing hundreds. You are going to lose thousands of people. You are going to lose your dream for a Palestinian state. What is the meaning of winning? So he said, Ami, I'm surprised. After so many years, you still do not understand us. Victory for us is to see you suffer. This is all what we want. After 60 years, we will not be the only one who suffer in the Middle East. And he finished by saying, finally, we achieved a balance of power. Not books from the air. Your F-16 versus our Series 8 bomber. So usually I have very quick, not very clever, but very quick answers. In this case, I just told him go to hell or something like this. But I remember that I came back to the table and I asked Professor Mary Kaldor, the moderator, to postpone what we should discuss and to try to understand what is the essence of winning, what is the essence of victory in the Middle East in the beginning of the 21st century. And what we are doing today, by the way, with Professor Amichai Cohen and other good people in the IDI is to try to understand this new phenomena in which we liberal democracies are facing asymmetric conflict or terror. It is a new phenomenon, and it is a new kind of war. Let me go back to Clausewitz. Clausewitz said, in a way, it is translated to Hebrew and, well, to English, to Hebrew, so I hope that I'm not wrong. He said something like this, war will not be changed. People have been killing each other throughout the history for power, for influence, for territory, resources, and they will go on killing each other for the rest of history. As long as people are people, but this is the nature of war. The character of war is changing every time with revolutions in technology and culture. So we try to understand what are the relevant revolutions. We take the globalization as a revolution in all aspects of life, but in this case, in culture, and the revolution in technology, which is communication, digitation, internet, whatever, it's media. These are the technology and the cultural revolutions that shaped or create the new character of war, in a way, the new war. I'm not going to discuss all what we are doing because we are just in the beginning and we don't have all the conclusions, but I would like to point 5 characteristics of our research. First of all, the sequence. In the old wars, the classic wars, the total wars, between states, it was a process. First, we had to achieve victory in the battlefield. We called it decisive victory. I'm not sure it's hachra'a in English. How do you say it? I think it's decisive victory. To make sure, by the way, not to reach the point in which they cannot go on fighting, but we had to achieve a point in which they do not want to go on fighting. And then, when we achieved results in the battlefield, we followed in order to dictate the new peace, the future peace after the war. We did it in Vienna, in Paris, everywhere. And this was 19th, 20th century, after the mid, 45, in the Israeli case, probably 73. These were the classic wars. The war of today is totally different. Totally different. First of all, we understand, and it was said, and I'm not going to repeat it, we are fighting in parallel, in 4 fronts. Battlefield is one, warfare. The second is media, or we call it image fear. It is not the media, it's the images that the media create in the eyes of all the spectators around the world. They become spectators. Once they are spectators in the global world of today, they participate and they shape the policy of the government, and they shape the decisions in the UN and the decisions of corporate or businesses that decide to boycott without any relevance to what will be decided in the court of law. It is the spectators that create this notion. The third is lawfare, and the fourth is diplomacy. Now, all these fronts influence each other, and the question where victory is achieved is becoming vague. I do not accept what Boaz said before, that we have to win in all the fronts. It is impossible. But what I claim is that the battlefield is becoming less and less relevant to the concept of victory. Victory is achieved in the eyes of the spectators all over the world. Now, if I'm true, it means that sometimes we have to give up achievement in the battlefield in order to achieve or to be closer to gain victory in the eyes of the spectators. By the way, the case of the Turkish flotilla is a perfect case. And it is not important whether we were right or wrong legally. By the way, an anecdote, I'm not sure I'm right, but I believe I do. A friend of mine who was sitting in the group that took the decision to attack the ship or the flotilla, he said, look, the General Chief of Staff, he said, look, we can stop the flotilla. We know that there is no ammunition. It was obvious. It was televised all over the world. Well, knives are not weapons that allow us to stop penetrating weapons to Gaza. But civilians will be killed because our warriors, our soldiers, will have to defend themselves. So civilians will be killed. Do we really want to do it? So the legal advisor told them, look, unless we do it, the whole concept of naval blockade will not hold. And this was the reason why they decided to do it. So we won, probably, I have no idea, the lawfare. We won the battle, we stopped the ship. Are we closer to victory? I don't think so. Second characteristic. Well, when we say terror is a terror is a terror, it's stupid. It's not true. And this was why it was very important for me to explain the view of the person in the Shin Bet. We know that there are many terror organizations. We know that they are not coming from the same culture, the same religion. Let me go back. Look, I believe that most of us read the books of Huntington and the book of Fukuyama. End of history and clashes between civilizations. Okay, none of them was right. I think that Huntington was much closer, but unfortunately, reality in the Middle East is much more complicated. What we see in the Middle East is not clashes between civilizations, clashes within civilization. Islam is fighting for the right way of Islam. Shia against Sunni, radicals against pragmatic. Everybody is killing everybody, but only Muslims. I'm saying it because there are different organizations, different cultures, different ideologies, and different goals, and different strategies. Now, when we put all of them together, in a way we are uniting them and we are empowering the enemy. It's a huge mistake. The approach that we have to take is to try to see the nuances. And it took us in Israel, well, it took America many years to understand it. I believe that Americans are closer than we are to understand this concept of terror is not the same terror, and to adopt different strategies against different enemies. In a way, different kind of war. And there is a very interesting question that we are asking our lawyers. Can we, since we believe that we are fighting different kind of wars, can we try to understand differently the aspect, the legal aspect in the battlefield when we fight an enemy which we believe is trying to destroy the whole state system, totally radical, trying to launch absolute war. We know that if they will have weapon of mass destruction, is not in order to deter, is in order to use it. We know it from the intelligence point of view. But on the other hand, there are terror organizations who want to join the state system. They want the state to be Muslim, but they accept the concept of globalization when it comes to economy, even when it comes to democracy. Well, They have different way of explaining democracy. But they do not threaten the state system as a whole. Can we see a scenario in which we do not understand the law of war when we fight these two totally different kind of enemies? Third characteristic, we discuss asymmetry. And usually we understand, okay, organization against state, and we obey international law, they do not. And we are using F-16, and they are using suicide bombers, and it's obvious. This is asymmetry. We do not discuss enough the strategy. We are still using techniques and strategic way of thinking of the old total wars. In the public debate, by the way, I think that our military generals understand it. Today, during the last 5 years, you will not hear from an Israeli general the idea of decisive victory in the battlefield. They are much more pragmatic and much more constrained than our politicians and than our public debate. But what we face is something very different, or very, very strange, and very frustrating. Because we, as a nation, are still trying to achieve. We want them to raise a white flag. By the way, if you did listen to our television during 52 days, all the people who explained us the behavior of Hamas, they promised us in 2 days they will raise a white flag. So they did not. They did not because we are trying to achieve decisive victory, and their strategy is steadfastness. Their strategy is we shall never surrender. They do not want to kill us, all of us. They do not think that they have the power. They do not want to conquer all the state of Israel. All what they want is steadfastness. Now the paradox is, I remember when I was a kid, we used to play rock, paper, scissors, shoot. You know, you used to play this? Okay. What happened when a stone, rock, meet paper? Who wins? The paper. So steadfastness is a paper. And the old idea of decisive victory is the rock. And when these two totally different strategies meet, most Israelis do not believe that after, conquering cities, killing hundreds, the moment that we leave, they are dancing on the roofs. They are not playing. They really feel that they won because they stood fast. They did not surrender, as this is a strategy. And since I do not have enough time, I will finish by, we are going to lose the whole concept of victory. It's okay. I have no answers. But I want to finish by one point, okay? 1 point. One characteristic, which is we are spending much time, probably too much, discussing the battlefield. We do not pay attention to what we call home front. It is very, very difficult to be minority in Israel today. Very difficult. During the last operation, some of our ministers asked us publicly, in the public television, to boycott all our Arab citizens. And nobody said anything. I'm saying nobody, which means, well, the president said something. But ministers, prime minister, nobody. Now, from the eyes of the director of the Shin Bet, when I was a child, I did not have to la'alot laTorah when I was bar mitzvah. I was born in a kibbutz. It was a very socialist society, but my father gave me a book, 1984, George Orwell. Said, read this book, and we shall discuss it. And I read the book. And it was very frightening. Now, from the eyes of the director of the Israeli Shin Bet, I want just to finish by explaining what we call the double impact of fear. In the war of today, which is very long, we cannot do what we did in the old wars. In the old wars, it was okay for Americans to lock thousands of Japanese during the war. They couldn't care less about rights of minorities or human rights. It was okay because we have to win the war to achieve decisive victory. Nazis are the bad guys, and we have to achieve victory. That's it. So forget about civil liberties. Well, it was possible, first of all, because it was a different world, different society, different set of values, but the idea was that the war will end. It was very clear. It will take 3 years, 5 years, but we will know exactly when it will happen. We know how to describe the day later. We know what is victory all about. The war of today is totally different. We do not know when it will end. We do not know to describe the day later. And we know that it will be very long, many years. Now, this is why we cannot give up civil rights, knowing that on the day later, we shall adopt it again, because the day later will not come. Now, the goal of the terrorist is not to kill all of us and not to conquer our cities, is to create fear. Once they created fear, they are winning every day. They are destroying our society day by day. Rationally, the administration understands it and should do everything in order to reduce the level of fear. Administrations do not do it. Administration has to create more fear because they need the budget, they need the support of the people, they need to send us and our children to the battlefield. And if we shall not feel that it is fearful enough, we shall not support this. Now, what we face is a fearful society. In a fearful society, the basic conflict between security and human rights is destroyed. In a fearful society, the society every time will prefer security on human rights. And the Supreme Court will not be as brave as in the past in order to stop us. Now, not like in 1984, the pressure to give up on human rights is not top-down, is bottom-up. Leaders are much more pragmatic. The people in the street are demanding to give up human rights. Now, a friend of mine, Brian Jenkins, he wrote a great article, Incremental Tyranny. In a way, he is telling us, tyranny is not a decision of our leaders or not even our decision. It's something very simple. One day, we will wake and we shall see that we are living in a tyranny. Thank you very much.
we have 15, 20 minutes for questions and answers. Do we have the first question from the floor? Well, I can take the prerogative of the chair and ask the first question. If we speak about asymmetrical warfare, can we make the distinction between, I'm asking this to all the panelists, whoever thinks better first, is there a distinction between asymmetrical warfare or symmetrical warfare with a very weak army? In other words, Hezbollah used to be seen simply as a terrorist organization which attacks, perpetuates attacks. Now Hezbollah has claimed that it's going to attack the Galil. So if one day, capture territory in the Galil in the north, so if one day Hezbollah has 1,000 soldiers cross the border and start and infiltrate and try to conquer territory, and we react, are we fighting an asymmetrical warfare, or are we fighting a symmetrical warfare with a much weaker army?
Any volunteers? Well, as I mentioned in my presentation, I'm not sure that discussions about terminology are always something that productive, and here as well, I think that the issue of asymmetry during the last years, it turned around, because now I think that there are some weaknesses for the stronger army militarily. So, and even I agree that today the non-state actors, they have military power that is parallel to military forces. And so I think that in that perspective, asymmetry is irrelevant. I think that it has relevance on other scopes, other issues.
In a way, I think I explained it. I believe that the major parameter is the strategy. As long as the strategy is steadfastness, they see themselves as the asymmetry part of this equation. And this is the way they see the whole confrontation. So, and of course, the way they see legal issues, but I think for me the main parameter is the strategy. By the way, Hezbollah is a very, very unique phenomenon, because Hezbollah, in a way, they wear three hats, and their behavior is changing. For example, first of all, and this is the first priority, they see themselves as a representative of the Shia, was minority today, not exactly minority in Lebanon. Second, they see themselves as the people who represent Iran, the Shia movement or ideology in this part of the Middle East. And third, they see themselves as a liberator of Lebanese soil from Israeli occupation. Now, as long as this was the third one, the way that the Lebanese saw them, they got legitimacy. During the second Lebanese war, they did not have the support of the Lebanese until our armored divisions penetrated into Lebanon. This was a point in which, in a way, they presented, in retrospect, they presented their role again as liberators of. Now, if our strategy is to create a gap between civilians, Lebanese, and Hezbollah, this was a point in which we missed this opportunity. But okay, this is another question.
Okay, questions from the floor. Yes, Nina.
I want to talk a bit about the substantial issue, the procedural issue that you spoke about, and I think also maybe something about what Ami spoke about, new rules or different rules for different kind of, and I think, first of all, there's a lot of discussion about substance. And what happens with the discussion about substance is that it doesn't go out. It stays within, for example, the IDF or the government, and what goes out is really the procedural answers. And the reason it doesn't go out is because, and Someone spoke about new rules for new kinds of conflicts. There are not going to be any new rules for new kinds of conflicts. And any attempt to make new rules for new kinds of conflicts will lead to more limiting rules. The way the world is going today, if there was a conference convened and a new treaty on the laws of armed conflict, it just means that there would be more limitations on states, not less limitations on states. Human rights would be even stronger inside. And that also affects the reason, that's why one of the reasons that states in general, not only...
Against ISIS too?
Against anyone, yes. You won't be able today in the international arena get any more leeway, only more restrictions. Now, and what happens is that when I was in the IDF, we had all the time very substantial dilemmas. And then you look and you try to find answers. In the literature, everything is very general and theoretic. You try to find answers from what other militaries do. Nobody has substantial dilemmas presented and analyzed outside. Everything is inside. We try to ask them, what did you do in such circumstances? They're not ready to say, it's classified. Why? Because if you do go out, you get criticized and you get the limitations and you're in a situation. I remember we thought after the Second Lebanon War to write an article. I wrote an article with one of my officers about specific dilemmas that we had and how we analyzed those dilemmas. And we never published it because we said, we think it's a good analysis and it was very innovative and it will help other militaries and it will help us. But what happens if then we have articles saying that what we did was illegal? Then we have our confession all written down when we get to the criminal proceedings. So today countries are afraid of having substantial debate out there, and what we are left with is with presenting the procedural aspects of it. Not because there's no substance, there's a lot of substance, it's just behind closed doors.
More questions? Yes, in the back.
My question is to Mr. Ayalon. Is the problem that steadfast is not an expression of Arab culture which demands that honor be protected almost at any price? And Israel's failure is in not analyzing, not understanding Arab culture and giving it the respect that maybe is due to it, particularly in our educational system when Arabic is not compulsory language.
I don't think so. Of course, there is Arab culture, and I do agree that we do not quite understand it, but when I was a child, we studied history and the people of Israel in Egypt. But in a way, what is the meaning? It's in a way, it's the way I understood the Israelis, the Jewish people, as slaves in Egypt. The whole idea was steadfastness. No matter what Pharaoh did to us, he did not break us. But this is a concept. It was defined clearly, perfectly in the Bible. By the way, sometimes, I was asked, and this is not the question, but, the idea that it's only the Muslim or the Arab culture. I lost many friends when I said the first suicide attacker was Samson in our Bible. When you read what he did, this is exactly the definition of a suicide bomber. He reached the point in which he decided that this is what he will do. So I said, and she told me, but he was a prophet. So it's not a question of Arab or Muslim culture or a Jewish or Israeli culture. It's a basic human behavior in a state of humiliation and lack of hope. This is the way I understand it.
Further questions? Sure. Yeah. Okay, go right ahead.
Thank you, Richard. Can I write briefly to Pina? Hi, Pina. That was our prediction about where international law is going. Actually, when when I'm speaking with humanitarian people who do humanitarian law from the other side, they predict that it would be impossible to reconclude the Geneva Conventions at this day and age. So time will tell. So you're right about public opinion. I'm not sure you're right about governments. My question was to Gil, to Dr. Liman. You used the concept of complementarity as a key, perhaps, way to insulate or to separate between the second and third stage. Can you say something about what is the government doing in that regard with respect to the Shape's second stage process, and if this is indeed the analysis which one should adhere to, should we be expecting more in that regard to underscore this message?
Yeah. Well, I think that I spoke about positive lawfare by the government. When the government takes initiatives from its own perspective and to promote its positions in international law. And I think that in the last years, maybe the best example, the main example for such an activity was the second part of the Turkel Commission. If you recall, the Turkel Commission was established to investigate the incident of the flotilla, as mentioned by Aaron earlier, and it was mandated also to discuss whether the way that Israel investigates allegations of war crimes compatible with its obligation under international law. And they produced a 300 pages report. I think it's probably the most comprehensive legal analysis of the question, what international law says about complementarity and about investigation. And one important conclusion was that the manner in which Israel investigates such allegation in general complies with its obligations under international law, and there is a set of recommendations, 18 recommendations, in order to improve it even better, to go to higher standards. And what the government is doing during the last, since the report was published, is to implement the recommendations. And our position is that as long as we comply with the recommendations, so we have a good defense between the second stage and the third stage. I know that not everyone accepts this position, and, including NGOs and others, that they don't accept the outcome of the Turkel. But I mean, this is a well-established report. Also, it was quoted by the different United Nations rapporteurs, and for now, this is the way that we conduct investigations.
Okay, anyone? Next question? Sure, Ann.
Thank you so much. A couple of things. This dichotomy between, supposedly, between security versus human rights is something that really has to be debunked. The whole idea that you suggested, our last speaker suggested, that somehow, you know, what the UN likes to say is we fight, combat terrorism versus human rights, whereas the first point of combating terrorism or security is the right to life. So that this kind of fictional idea, I mean, it's too bad that since 1984 you didn't make more of a more reading, to be honest, because we've had a situation where it's not just the state versus individual, it's far more complex. Individuals are groups of individuals and non-governmental organizations, and the state is only one actor in this very complex group of actors on the world stage in the context of terrorism. And if you draw it so simplistically as the state versus the individual, as if the state is not interested in our welfare as individuals, that's when tyranny succeeds. It's really the old Soviet model that somehow, that should have been rejected a long time ago.
And
we just have
a minute left.
The question is this idea that intention is somehow key. I mean, if the rapist in criminal law were to say, well, I didn't have any access to sex otherwise, my wife was in hospital, or would that make a difference? As opposed to saying that it was a Yazidi woman and and it was racism. I mean, even the United Nations says that justification for terrorism doesn't somehow vitiate it. So I just simply, and the very last point is the business of Nazi Germany. The mere idea that in history we all knew we would win and prevail over Nazi Germany, we knew there was an end date, is just so wrong on the facts. So I simply do not understand, and I ask you to explain to us how somehow the moral inversion of the state being wrong and the individual being right. I don't get it.
Okay.
It's too complicated.
All right.
I have to get the plane in about 30
I think
minutes. I'm sorry.
Ami said to me it's too complicated. How many people have questions remaining?
Hi, I am a law professor from Italy, but the humanitarian law is not my specialty, so I declare this. It's very interesting, I think, for us who come from outside Israel to hear these discussions from various point of views. Now, you distinguish substantive from law from procedural rules, but the real issue, I have the impression, is also the substantive rules in asymmetric war in the sense you said. I mean, I looked before coming here, where are the IDF manuals on this, for instance? Are they available? What are the operative rules? Or they don't exist, or they are not public, it's too difficult. I mean, the distinction between civil and military in such a situation. I came 2 days ago from Italy. I walked in Tel Aviv on Allenby Road. There is an old synagogue. There is a plate saying that here, under the synagogue, Irgun kept weapons which the British discovered and confiscated in 1946 and 47. Now, are there rules for the United Nations to check, like the Red Cross at the hospitals, that the emblem of the Red Cross, that the emblem of the UN is not abused, for instance? And what are the rules before attacking and bombing them? What level of credibility of investigation, as was said? What about military proportionality? Targeted killing has been now admitted, but the army targets a chief of Hamas, and there was his family. 2 persons, 5 persons, 10 civilians may be killed. Is there a limit? Is there who? This is what the outside world looks at the face second of the public opinion. Now,
Okay,
and also
can you
as
just
to the
limit it to
procedure.
a question?
Yeah,
because
are
we're really out of time.
investigations then published? I saw that investigations are being carried out. Will these be made public, disseminated in English, and so on? And then about the rules. Rules may change, like on targeted killing. Israel could do more. I think it's not just, there was a question, international conferences. For instance, recently, but let's say friendly nations who fight similar asymmetric wars. Recently, a couple of years ago, David Betterham, formerly legal advisor of the Foreign Office, promoted in London sets of principles on the scope of states' rights of self-defense against imminent or actual armed attack by non-state actors. This is rather using bellum and not
Okay,
using
can we get to
bellum.
the question,
Something
please?
like
Question.
that could be done. This is my question. Could that be done?
Okay.
And I have a third point, excuse me, if I may.
We don't want-
About
we
the
don't have
flotilla,
points. We
there
just
is
want a
another
question.
symmetry.
Question.
How it's looked here in Israel and how it's looked from abroad.
Thank
From
you.
abroad, there were peaceful peacemakers making a weekend to help poor Palestinians. Here, it was a law of war and military blockades. and a state like Israel should also consider, alas, how this is perceived outside, that that was perceived excessive military force, whereas from inside, properly,
All
it
right,
was
we
properly
understand your
considered.
point. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll take the opportunity. I'm not sure this is exactly what you were alluding to, but I want to take the opportunity to clarify a point, and I think this was also raised in what Pnina said. I'm not suggesting, at least I'm not criticizing, that military lawyers do not know the substantive rules or that they do not discuss the substantive. Of course they do. The point I was making is that in some areas there are no substantive rules, and so therefore there is nothing to discuss, or that the disagreements or agreements are such that there is no point to discuss. The rules, in a sense that there is a disagreement, so what can you do about it? Or there is an agreement about it, but the question is how to execute it. So I'm not criticizing, I'm just pointing out, and this is, if you want, I'm criticizing myself. Or I should say, since Yuval is here, I'm criticizing ourselves, meaning the legal scholars here, who deal with IHL, that we have not paid enough attention to this facet of international humanitarian law, and we should pay more attention to that. That's the point I was making. I'm not sure if it answered your point, but that's.
I will also take on one of the issues that you raised, the issue of publication. One of the lessons that we learned from the last round of Operation Cast Lead and the Goldstone report is that we, and when I say we, I refer to the states, different ministries, we should strive to publish as much as we can, publish what we did, publish the way that we analyze the main legal questions, to publish the outcome of investigations, to publish lessons learned, and we published a lot. After Casled, was the first report was 174 pages in English about the legal and factual aspects of the operation. Then we published 2 additional reports, I don't remember, 60 or 70 pages each one about the investigations. And when we dealt with the flotilla incident, we also prepared something, but eventually there was a Turkey report, so we worked for nothing. But and I'm sure that you can all expect that in the coming weeks there will be another paper, a governmental paper coming from the government of Israel and explaining what we did on protective edge. Because I don't think that we should be shy on the way that we analyze international law, the way that we analyze the situation in Gaza, the way that we implement our commitment to international law, and so, as I said, we have something to expect. Thank you.
Okay. Ami Ayalon asked me to extend his apologies. He had to leave early to go to the airport. Thank you very much for listening.